$300,000. For many people, that number sounds like a finish line. It's the kind of number that shows up in financial goals, retirement calculators, and late-night conversations about making it. If someone told you they had a $300,000 net worth, your first reaction might be simple. They must be doing pretty well. After all, building that amount of wealth doesn't happen overnight. It usually represents years of saving, investing, career growth, and discipline. Maybe it's a combination of retirement accounts, a brokerage portfolio, some home equity, and a bit of cash on the side. On paper, it looks impressive. But here's the strange part. For many people who actually reach that milestone, they don't feel the way they expected. Instead of feeling rich, they feel something closer to neutral, sometimes even behind. And that disconnect is becoming more common every year. Because the truth is, $300,000 today doesn't carry the same psychological weight it once did. Not because the number itself changed, but because everything around it has. Housing prices have surged, groceries cost more, education, healthcare, childcare, and insurance continue to rise. Even everyday experiences like travel or dining out feel more expensive than they did just a few years ago. So when someone finally reaches that long-imagined milestone, instead of relief, they often feel a new question forming in the back of their mind. Wait, is this actually enough? And the data suggests this feeling isn't just personal insecurity. It's part of a much bigger shift in how people perceive wealth. Recent surveys show that as of 2025, the average American believes it takes about $839,000 just to feel financially comfortable. Not wealthy, just comfortable. Which means when someone hits $300,000, they're barely over a third of what people now consider the comfort zone. Suddenly, what once looked like a finish line starts to look more like a starting block. But here's where things get even more interesting. Because the real story isn't just about inflation or rising costs. It's about something deeper. The definition of wealth itself is changing. And once you understand that shift, the feeling that $300,000 is nothing starts to make a lot more sense. So in this video, we're going to break down 3 important questions. Why does $300,000 feel smaller than it should? What economic forces are quietly moving the goalposts of wealth? And most importantly, if chasing bigger numbers isn't the answer, what actually makes people feel financially secure? Because the surprising truth is, wealth today may have less to do with the size of your portfolio and more to do with the quality of your life. But to understand why, we first need to look at the numbers. And they reveal a reality most people never expected. For decades, people had a simple mental picture of wealth. Hit 6 figures, save diligently, build a few $100,000s in investments, and eventually, life would start to feel financially secure. But over the past few years, something important has changed. The benchmark for financial comfort has quietly moved. And the numbers reveal just how dramatic that shift has become. Recent financial surveys show that as of 2025, Americans believe it takes an average of about $839,000 in net worth just to feel financially comfortable. Not wealthy, not rich, just comfortable. Think about that for a moment. Comfort, the feeling that your finances are stable and under control, now requires nearly 3 times the wealth of $300,000. That gap alone explains why someone reaching the $300K milestone might still feel like they're climbing uphill. But the story becomes even more interesting when you break the numbers down by generation, because different age groups have very different expectations about what comfortable actually means. For Gen Z, the youngest generation entering the workforce, the number is surprisingly lower. On average, Gen Z believes they need around $329,000 to feel financially comfortable, which means that for someone in their early 20s, a 300K net worth might actually feel like a major achievement. But move up one generation and the expectations rise dramatically. Millennials, now entering their prime earning years, say they need about $847,000 in net worth to feel financially comfortable. That's nearly 3 times the 300K milestone. And for baby boomers, the generation closest to retirement, the number climbs even higher, around $943,000, nearly $1 million just to feel stable. This generational divide reveals something powerful. The older people get, the more expensive financial security appears. Why? Because with age comes a clearer understanding of life's real costs: mortgages, healthcare, family responsibilities, retirement planning, unexpected emergencies. When you're young, $300,000 feels enormous, but when you've seen decades of financial reality, that number starts to feel smaller. And that shift in perspective creates a strange psychological effect. Someone can be objectively doing well, far better than the average person, and still feel behind because the goalpost keeps moving. The moment one milestone is reached, another appears further down the road. 100,000 becomes 300,000. 300,000 becomes 800,000. 800,000 starts pointing towards 7 figures. It's a cycle that can make progress feel invisible. And that's one of the hidden reasons why financial success today often feels strangely unsatisfying. But there's another force making this feeling even stronger. And it has nothing to do with personal expectations. It has everything to do with the economy itself. Because in the last few years, the financial environment around us has changed dramatically. And those changes are quietly reshaping what money actually means. So if the benchmark for financial comfort has moved, the next question becomes obvious. Why? Why does it suddenly feel like the amount of money needed to feel secure keeps climbing higher every year? The answer isn't just psychological, it's economic. In fact, surveys show that 63% of people believe the bar for wealth is rising, and they point to 3 major forces driving that shift. The first and most obvious is inflation. About 73% of people say rising prices are the biggest reason the definition of wealth keeps changing. And when you look around, it's easy to see why. Groceries cost more. Rent and housing prices have surged in many cities. Healthcare continues to climb. Education costs keep rising. Even small everyday expenses, streaming subscriptions, insurance, transportation, have steadily increased. None of these changes happen overnight, but over time they quietly reshape how far money actually goes. A $300,000 net worth might have represented decades of financial security 20 years ago. Today, it often represents something very different, a good start, but not the finish line. The second factor people point to is the broader economic environment. Around 62% of respondents say the economy itself has made wealth feel more distant. Markets have become more volatile. Interest rates fluctuate. Job security feels less predictable. And the global economy can shift rapidly due to events no one can control, from geopolitical conflicts to technological disruption. This creates a constant background uncertainty. People no longer measure wealth just by how much money they have today. They measure it by how resilient their finances are tomorrow. And that changes the number dramatically. The third factor people point to is something most people don't talk about openly: taxes. Nearly 48% of people say rising taxes contribute to the feeling that wealth is harder to achieve. Because when income increases, tax obligations often increase too. And suddenly, the gap between what you earn and what you actually keep becomes more noticeable. All of these forces combine into one powerful reality: the financial ladder is getting taller. Which brings us to one of the most surprising numbers in modern wealth surveys. When asked what net worth actually qualifies as being wealthy, Americans now give an average answer of around $2.3 million. Not hundreds of thousands, millions. That means someone with 300,000 isn't even close to the level most people associate with being rich. They're closer to the early stages of wealth building. And when that realization hits, it can create a strange emotional gap. On paper, someone might be doing very well, but psychologically, they feel like they're still climbing. And that gap between numbers and emotions is where many people get stuck. Because if the bar for wealth keeps rising, it can start to feel like you're chasing something that keeps moving further away. But here's the surprising twist. When researchers looked deeper into what actually makes people feel wealthy, money wasn't the main factor, not even close.
At this point, the story seems straightforward. If the bar for financial comfort is rising, and true wealth now feels like it requires millions, then the obvious conclusion would be simple. More money equals feeling wealthier. But when researchers actually asked people what makes them feel rich, the answers told a very different story. Because while money matters, it turns out it isn't the primary driver of feeling wealthy. In fact, when people were asked whether they feel wealthy purely based on their finances, the results were surprisingly low. Only 49% of people say their money alone makes them feel wealthy. Less than half. Which means the majority of people, even those doing well financially, don't associate wealth purely with the size of their bank account. But when the survey shifted to other areas of life, the numbers changed dramatically. More than 80% of people said they feel wealthy when it comes to the quality of their relationships, friends, family, meaningful connections. These turned out to be some of the strongest indicators of perceived wealth. The same pattern appeared when people were asked about happiness and well-being. Again, more than 80% reported feeling wealthy when they measured life through the lens of emotional satisfaction. Not dollars, not investments, but how they actually feel day to day. And perhaps most interesting of all was the role of time. Free time, flexibility, the ability to choose how you spend your day. When people had control over their schedule and time with loved ones, the sense of wealth increased dramatically, which reveals something powerful. Wealth is about more than money. It's about well-being. For decades, society framed wealth as a simple financial scoreboard, a number, a net worth, a portfolio balance. But the data shows that people experience wealth in a much broader way. Financial security matters, of course it does. Money can remove stress, create opportunities, and provide stability. But beyond a certain point, additional dollars don't always translate into additional fulfillment. And that's where the feeling that $300,000 is nothing can become misleading. Because the number itself may not be the real issue. The real issue is the expectation attached to it. Many people assume that reaching a certain net worth will automatically unlock peace of mind. That once they cross a specific financial milestone, everything will feel stable. But life rarely works that way. The target moves, expenses change, priorities evolve, and suddenly the number that once felt enormous begins to look ordinary. Which is why financial experts often repeat a simple but powerful idea. Wealth is very personal. It isn't just about hitting a universal number that society labels as success. It's about building a life where your finances support the things that actually matter to you. And once you start viewing wealth through that lens, the conversation shifts completely. Because instead of asking, how much money do I need to feel rich? The question becomes something much more meaningful. What kind of life am I actually trying to build? And the answer to that question leads directly to the next piece of the puzzle. Once you understand that wealth is personal, a deeper pattern begins to appear. Because for many people, the real problem isn't the number itself. It's what they believe the number will do for them.
Somewhere along the way, we absorb an idea that financial milestones will unlock emotional milestones. Reach $100,000 and you'll feel secure. Reach $300,000 and you'll feel successful. Reach $1 million and you'll finally feel wealthy. But what often happens in reality is something very different. The moment one milestone is reached, another one quietly replaces it. Psychologists sometimes call this the moving goalpost effect. You work hard to reach a target, you finally achieve it. But instead of satisfaction, your mind immediately recalculates the next level. The finish line shifts forward and suddenly the accomplishment feels smaller than expected. That's exactly what happens with a $300,000 net worth. Years ago, that number represented serious financial progress. But today, when people compare it to rising costs, retirement needs, and the cultural image of wealth, it can start to feel like just the beginning. Social comparison plays a major role here as well. Thanks to social media, online finance communities, and constant exposure to other people's success stories, we're now surrounded by financial benchmarks. Someone online celebrates hitting 500K. Another shares their journey to 1 million. Another talks about retiring early with $3 million invested. And without realizing it, our brains start to recalibrate what normal looks like. The result? Even meaningful progress can feel invisible. A person who has spent years building their savings might technically be ahead of the average household, but emotionally they feel behind the people they see online. This creates a subtle but powerful psychological pressure. Instead of appreciating progress, people focus on the distance remaining, and that distance can feel overwhelming, especially when the cultural definition of wealth now sits around $2.3 million. Compared to that number, 300K seems small, but the truth is that comparison misses something important. Because financial success isn't just about reaching the biggest number possible. It's about building stability, freedom, and resilience over time. And that journey doesn't happen in giant leaps. It happens through steady progress, through consistent investing, through smart financial habits, through years of discipline that compound quietly in the background. Which means the real danger isn't that $300,000 is nothing. The real danger is believing that financial progress doesn't matter until it reaches some distant number. Because when people start thinking that way, motivation disappears. Saving feels pointless, investing feels slow, and long-term discipline becomes harder to maintain. But there's one factor that completely changes this dynamic. One thing that separates people who feel confident about their financial future from those who constantly feel uncertain. And interestingly, it has very little to do with the size of their net worth. If money alone doesn't determine whether people feel wealthy, then what does? One of the most powerful factors researchers have discovered is something surprisingly simple: a financial plan. Not a complicated spreadsheet, not a perfect investment strategy. Just a clear roadmap for how someone's money connects to their life goals. Because when people have that roadmap, something remarkable happens. Their confidence skyrockets. Surveys consistently show that individuals with a documented financial plan feel dramatically more optimistic about their future. In fact, about 96% of people who have a financial plan believe they will reach their financial goals. That's an astonishing level of confidence, and it highlights something many people overlook. The difference between feeling financially secure and feeling financially anxious isn't often about the amount of money someone has. It's about clarity. Think about two people who both have a $300,000 net worth. On paper, they look identical, but their emotional experiences can be completely different. The first person checks their net worth occasionally, but doesn't have a clear long-term strategy. They aren't sure how much they should be saving. They don't know exactly when they want to retire, and they haven't mapped out what their investments need to achieve. So every market downturn feels stressful, every unexpected expense feels threatening, and every financial milestone feels temporary because they don't know where the path is leading. Now imagine the second person. They also have $300,000, but they've taken time to define their financial goals. They know how much they're investing each year. They understand the long-term power of compound growth. They've estimated what retirement might look like, and they've built a strategy to gradually move toward that vision. The number in their account may be the same, but the feeling is completely different because planning turns aspiration into action. It transforms vague financial hopes into specific steps. Instead of asking, is $300,000 enough? They ask a more productive question. Is my plan working? That shift in mindset changes everything. Suddenly, the focus moves away from comparing numbers with strangers on the internet and toward measuring progress against your own goals, which is exactly where financial confidence comes from. Because wealth isn't built through random milestones. It's built through consistent direction. And once people start thinking this way, something interesting happens. The number itself, whether it's $300,000 or $3 million, becomes less emotionally overwhelming. Because instead of chasing a moving target, they're following a path they've intentionally designed. And that realization leads to the most important question of all. If wealth is personal, if the bar for comfort keeps moving, and if planning is the real driver of confidence, then what should someone actually do when they reach $300,000? Reaching $300,000 net worth isn't the end of the journey. It's evidence that you've already built discipline. It means you've saved consistently. You've delayed gratification. You've invested for the long term. That alone puts you ahead of a large portion of households globally. But if it still feels like nothing, the solution isn't to dismiss the number, and it isn't to chase a random bigger one either. The solution is to shift the definition of success from comparison to clarity. Because here's what the data consistently shows. When people move from vague financial hopes to a structured plan, their confidence increases dramatically. Those with a documented financial strategy are far more likely to believe they will reach their goals. And that confidence isn't based on emotion. It's based on structure. Clear savings targets, defined investment allocations, retirement projections, emergency fund planning, debt management. When each piece has a purpose, money stops feeling abstract. It starts feeling intentional. This is where the mindset shift becomes powerful. Instead of thinking $300,000 isn't enough, you begin asking, what is this $300,000 doing for me? Is it invested in assets that grow over time? Is it positioned for long-term compounding? Does it support your future flexibility? Because wealth isn't just about accumulating numbers. It's about increasing options. And options create freedom. Freedom to change careers, freedom to relocate, freedom to take time off, freedom to support your family, freedom to respond to opportunities. That kind of freedom doesn't always require millions, but it does require direction. This is why planning turns aspiration into action. Without a plan, wealth becomes a comparison game. With a plan, wealth becomes a progress system. And progress feels different from pressure. When you know exactly what your next financial milestone is and how you'll reach it, the emotional weight decreases. The focus shifts from "am I rich yet?" to "am I improving?" And improvement is measurable. It compounds. It builds momentum. So instead of asking whether $300,000 should feel like enough, ask whether your current financial strategy is aligned with your long-term vision. Because the number itself is not the finish line. It's a checkpoint. And checkpoints are meant to confirm direction, not define identity. When you see wealth this way, something powerful happens. The stress decreases, The comparison fades, and financial progress starts to feel meaningful again, because wealth stops being a moving target and becomes a deliberate journey. $300,000. For some people, that number represents freedom. For others, it feels surprisingly small. But now we understand why. The bar for financial comfort is moving. Inflation has changed purchasing power. Economic uncertainty has reshaped expectations. Generational benchmarks differ dramatically, and surveys show that the average perception of wealth now sits in the millions. At the same time, research makes something equally clear. Wealth is about more than money. It's about well-being, relationships, happiness, free time, purpose, and perhaps most importantly, confidence. Because people with a clear financial plan feel significantly more certain about their future. Planning turns aspiration into action. It transforms vague hope into structured progress. So if you have $300,000 net worth or you're working towards it, don't let the number define your emotional state. Let it inform your strategy. Define what wealth means to you personally. Decide what financial comfort looks like in your life. Create a roadmap and focus on steady improvement rather than constant comparison. Because real wealth isn't just about hitting a headline number. It's about building a life where your money supports your values, your goals, and your peace of mind. And when that happens, even $300,000 can feel like something powerful. Not because it's the final destination, but because it's part of a plan. And that makes all the difference.